Good evening from New York. I'm David Schuster in for Keith Olbermann. Whether or not you agree with all of the president's economic policies, Mr. Obama increasingly looks like the adult in the room, particularly compared to certain Republican governors who are still almost desperately trying to turn down some of that stimulus money. And in our fifth story in the countdown, state legislatures have a message for those recalcitrant governors. Show us the money or else. After meeting with members of his economic team and the Federal Reserve Chairman, the president noted definite glimmers of hope on the economic front today, like a significant increase in mortgage refinancing, progress towards unlocking lending, including a 20% increase in small business loans, and stimulus package money beginning to flow to taxpayers in the form of tax cuts and to infrastructure projects.
We're starting to see progress. And if we stick with it, if we don't flinch in the face of some difficulties, then I feel absolutely convinced that we are going to get this economy back on track.
Meantime, in what now seems like an old fight over the stimulus money, Governor Mark Sanford of South Carolina flinched. Both parties of his own state's legislature are so angry with the governor, he has been forced to advertise to try and explain his opposition to taking all the stimulus money available to his state. What you will not hear in that commercial, however, are the specifics of what Governor Sanford still opposes, like extra money for unemployment benefits. But the governor says, quote, there is a better way than saddling our children with massive debts. Yet rather than saddling, Governor Sanford is actually straddling, or rather awkwardly trying to do so, because despite his so-called principled stance, he recently submitted the necessary letter asking to be eligible for those federal funds, as have other potential 2012 GOP presidential contenders, Governor Sarah Palin of Alaska and Governor Bobby Jindal of Louisiana. Indeed, one day after Governor Palin said she would refuse 31% of the stimulus money, her lieutenant governor, Sean Parnell, was trotted out to soften that stance, explaining that all the money was still on the table. While not ready for primetime, Governor Jindal still opposes $98 million in extra unemployment benefits and $9.5 million for health spending. Let's bring in MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. And Richard, good to see you as always.
Good to be with you, David.
Richard, Governor Sanford recently said he's trying to compromise, but that, quote, I got beaten up pretty bad on it. Putting aside for the moment the unemployed people in South Carolina who would get beaten up by Sanford's policies, how much more do you think the governor will get beaten up over this politically?
Oh, there's plenty more where that came from. I mean, there's a sign here of what he expects to come because he's out there spending so much money on these TV ads. These are not cheap ads. And the problem here is that all of these governors face a terrible credibility problem. They blinked. They tried to stand up to the federal government, to the president himself, and they had to back down. They really gave themselves no room for maneuver here. And it's no surprise when you think that Governor Sanford's best friends are actually John McCain and Lindsey Graham, the kind of people who made those big gambles in the presidential campaign. It's a bit like John McCain saying he's going to suspend his campaign and then not suspending his campaign because of the economic crisis. You cannot say you're going to turn down the dollars and then take them and build out from there, as we expect Governor Sanford to do, into a national figure.
The crux of the matter is that the constituents of all three of these states want this money, and these governors are literally acting against these states' economic self-interest. Nevertheless, will the governor succeed logistically in trying to refuse even some of the money?
Well, I don't know that it's going to be a logistical thing. I think there's going to be some symbolic measures. Governor Sanford is already trying to get the state legislature to do some measures to pay back debt, which is his supposed goal here. So these kind of symbolic things may be face-saving measures. They may be really token gestures because they're so small compared to the amount of dollars they're taking anyway. But I expect this will run because these governors really do need to have something to show at the end of it. And right now, they just have something foolish to show.
Well, never mind just the tone deafness of all of this. The arguments actually feel old at this point because, well, it seems like the president is about 4 or 5 initiatives beyond the stimulus. Isn't that sort of a peculiar contrast?
Well, the contrast is between the sort of small-bore policies that these governors are trying to enact here, and the kind of bigger stuff that the White House and that voters want to do, which is to fix the economy. So this isn't really about ideological positioning or about making a big statement, no matter how worthy, about the federal debt and about the debt incurred by future generations. It's about getting people into their jobs right now, or in the case of South Carolina, keeping people like teachers in their jobs. So until these governors move on from ideological position to where the voters are right now, which is people needing help, then they're going to be failing, and that's what makes them smaller. It's not just the contrasting position with the president.
Is there a political out for these governors, say, by invoking teachers, the example you just gave? In other words, invoke them, accept all the money despite their initial objections, or are they so far down this road that they have no choice but to dig in?
Well, the road they're really down here is running for national office in the next general election, the next presidential election. And that's the problem here, because if they cannot find a way out, a neat way out that saves their credibility or saves their stature, you know, it's no good just preaching to the choir, the conservative choir, who may give them money for their future presidential runs. They need to look like they're responsible governors right now. That's what they're failing at, and until they figure out how to get off this branch, this limb that they've climbed on, they're really going to have credibility problems.
MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. And Richard, thanks as always for coming on.
Thank you, David.